Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the Age Group Triathlon Podcast. My name is Simon Olney, I'm a professional triathlon coach, and in this week's episode I'm going to be looking at when not to follow your training plan, what you should do instead, and how to help you get back on track. Now, following a training plan is a bit of a given for most athletes. If you want to have that level of accountability, if you want to have that structure, if you want to know that you're spending all of your time training doing the right kind of thing, then a triathlon is a little bit of a bona fide essential. However, that's not to say that your triathlon should be treated, like an absolute rule book, a completely inflexible pattern that you have to stick to. I can understand how people might think that. They might think, especially if they've paid good money for the training plan. I need to stick to the training plan. I've got to do this. I've got to do this. When the reality is that there is no training plan and no coach on this planet who is good enough to write you a plan where if you hit every single one of your sessions, you're going to hit your goal with nothing in the way of leeway or contingency in there. Now, generally speaking, we have two levers that we can pull as coaches or self-coached athletes when we want to sort of change our training plan, when we decide that this isn't working for us. Okay, one lever we can pull is volume. We can do more volume or we can do less volume. And that really, it comes down to sort of an understanding of the time that you have available. As much as anything else, somebody who is 17, they're single, they've recently finished school and they might be doing a part-time job, but they're really throwing themselves at this triathlon thing, is going to have a very different experience to somebody in, say, their sort of late 30s, early 40s, who's got a family, working really hard at the moment. It's got a lot of plates spinning at this point in time in their life. Those athletes are going to have a lot more time they can dedicate. And what may be a low amount of volume to a younger athlete may be a really high volume to somebody sort of my age, as an example. When I have worked with young people who have said, oh yes, I'm definitely going to want to train for this triathlon, but just so you know, I'm going to be hitting the gym every day as well. Now to me, I'm like, wow, like it's amazing that you find the time for that. But they're sort of studying at university, whatever the reason is, their life looks very different to mine. And you have to kind of, really try and work out, okay, so what's a lot of volume for me? What's a low volume for me? Can I increase this volume at all? And, the whole idea of more is better in triathlon is a bit of an outdated concept. There is certainly a point, sort of professional athletes sort of training 50 plus hour weeks. I think that thankfully is long gone. And we're a lot more sensible about the intensity that we do these days. But as age group athletes, I think that, we need to get away from the idea of, the more time that we squeeze out of our week that we're not spending with family, around the house, doing other things, the faster we're going to be, the more likely we're going to hit our goals on race day. As much as anything else, it might actually increase our risk of burnout. The second lever we have is intensity. So we can either increase intensity or we can decrease intensity. Now, the principles that apply to this are going to be very different to each athlete. It does depend slightly on the kind of plan that you're following, as well as your general strengths and weaknesses. It's not very often that I would advise an athlete to increase the intensity kind of off of their own back. However, there is a time where this is appropriate, because unless you have paid a coach to write you a completely bespoke training plan, and that coach knows absolutely everything about you, okay, there are going to be bits where it's like, I feel that I would just, I benefit from doing more of this kind of work. And I'm going to sort of fit that into my plan maybe. But if you do feel that you do want to do, say, a bit more threshold running, what you don't do is you don't swap an easy session for a threshold session. You'd swap maybe a VO2 max session for a threshold session, so you don't get that balance of intensity sort of mixed up, which tends to be relatively carefully curated. However, one of the running themes in this episode is going to be that you know your body better than any coach does or any training plan. And on top of that, you know exactly how your body feels on any given day when you wake up. And really, that has to come first the vast majority of the time. If you try to push back against that, if you wake up feeling like an absolute sack of potatoes, you're just not recovered from yesterday's session, you slept badly, you're under a fair bit of stress, but you think, no, I've got to drag myself through and do my session that I have today. That's the kind of thing that really drags people down a sort of a slippery slope where they can do this for a few weeks, where they keep throwing themselves at it, and then they reach a point where they just go, I can't do this anymore, and they just stop training. And I think that's sad, obviously, if they're not going to be achieving their goals. But I do want people to start thinking long term. I do want people to make their decisions on, when they do and they don't follow their training plan, based largely on sort of the races that they have coming up and how they feel coming into those races. What it is that may feel really good to you when you're a long way out from your race may feel really quite different when you actually sort of get closer to race day. And the closer you are to race day as well, the more I would generally recommend you have some leeway to change things up a little bit. If your body just isn't feeling good, if it's not feeling right, if you really genuinely feel unprepared for the demands of race day, it may be that you're not following a very good plan. I must have written sort of hundreds, if not thousands, of training plans over the last 9 years. And guess what? Some of them were better than others. Some of that is just from sort of an inexperience, gaining experience over time. Some of that is sort of a lack of communication and feedback from athletes. It is very different to write somebody a really brilliant plan if they just go, oh well, I'll just do whatever you tell me. Or equally, if they're always pushing back against everything you say, that good back and forth, that conversation, that's how you really hit the sweet spot with a plan. But of course, unless you are paying a coach who you can sort of message on a relatively sort of daily basis and feel things out, you do need to make some executive decisions, which is where this episode comes in. So the first reason that I'm going to give for why you might not want to follow a training plan is illness. Now, if you are feeling unwell, if you wake up one day and you can just tell that, it may be, for instance, that you suffer from migraines, and it may be that you've got a bit of a aurora in your vision, and you think, I know exactly where this is going, and I know that I need to take some relatively sort of swift action to try to alleviate this as much as possible. Or it may be that you wake up and feel really nauseous. It may be that your other half or your children have been suffering with a bug, and you wake up and you've got a really sort of scratchy throat, and you think, oh, you know what? I think I know exactly where this is going. If you are unwell, you do have to ask yourself, okay, so can I still train? If your symptoms are entirely kind of above the neck, so if it's just sort of some like congestion, sneezing, stuff like that, generally speaking, you're okay to do a light session, but I would recommend against any intensity, because what may well be a sort of a light infection that could pass in 48 hours if you leave your body to do its thing. If you then go out and hammer yourself on the turbo train or a running track, there is a good chance that you're going to make it worse, and what could have been gone in a couple of days is actually going to drag out over a week. And if you're unwell, there's also a consideration for others. Now, it's one thing if you're going to go out on a trail and do a run, but if you're going to go to a swimming pool with all those sort of close confines of the changing rooms and other lane users, chlorine can only do so much if you're going to be breathing in somebody's face at the end of the lane. So you do need to have a little bit of consideration for other people as well. 9 times out of 10, if somebody comes to me and goes, oh, I didn't train today just because I woke up not feeling well, I'm going to be absolutely fine with that. And if you are only missing, say, a couple of days just to give your body a chance to get a head start on wherever the infection is, it's not really going to have much of an impact on our training, as long as you get back on that training once you've recovered. Now, if you get struck down with something really nasty, I mean, I had the flu about 6 weeks ago, and it completely knocked me off my feet. I spent 3 or 4 days in bed with it. It was horrible. And it took me a long time to build up to be able to do some training again. And you know what? That's all right. It doesn't matter an enormous amount, even if you miss a week's training. Okay, it is a part of training for endurance sports. You are going to have time off with illness. That is completely expected. Now, if you do find yourself really unwell and you start losing 2, maybe 3 weeks, if you spend time in hospital, all of this, obviously that is going to have a material impact on your performance. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you otherwise. And you might need to be very careful with how it is that you come back into training. Now, if you do miss sort of a few days or a week from your training, you might actually be able to pick the training up as if nothing happened. Just wake up on the first day that you feel really good and like you want to get back to training and go, right, what's on the schedule? However, if you do miss 2, 3 weeks of training, maybe more, you almost need to go back to the start with the training plan. Now, I know that's not the easiest thing to do when you have a big event coming up, but you can't continue with the same kind of level of volume intensity that you built yourself up to if you've had sort of a break of 3 weeks. Your body just isn't going to be able to cope with that level of training, and you will end up burning yourself out and not completing your race. Whereas if you dial things back, you could go back like a month in your training plan and try and pick things up where they were, see how you feel. But just charging on as if absolutely nothing happened, especially if you are definitely in the build up to the race. If you're about sort of 5 or 6 weeks out, it can be sort of tempting to go, oh, I just need to keep going, just need to keep push on, get real sort of race ready. But it's just not really the case. It's not really the right way to go about it. You are going to find yourself sort of disappointed with your result. You do need to just be honest with yourself and go, look, I've had this big blow and I need to adjust my training to get around that. And we're going to suggest towards the end of the episode ways that you can pick your training back up. If you are injured, this is another really good example of when you should be adapting your training plan. When you can't be following it, if you have what you believe to be any kind of swimming, cycling, or running injury. Now, generally speaking, I'm sort of referring to overuse injuries here. If you if your wrist hurts, for instance, then you can probably still certainly do running, maybe a bit of cycling. Swimming's probably a bad idea, so you might need to sort of change your training plan, switch that around there. If you have something like a case of Achilles tendonitis, a calf tear, if you have something that is really going to be affecting all three sports that you're doing, you probably need to stop training. And that really sucks to hear. But if you continue pushing when you have an issue that just isn't going to solve itself, it's not going to magically disappear, then yeah, you do need to stop training. Now, the general rule that I have and like give athletes before they decide that they are genuinely injured is, one run, if you start to get a bit of a pull or a tightness in a muscle, if your hip feels very tight, anything like that makes you think, oh, a warning light comes on. Like if you're driving a car, check engine. You think, oh, that's not good. And you may want to cut that session short. You may want to stop that session entirely. You may want to reduce the intensity of that session, whatever it takes. You should listen to your body. But one thing I really encourage you not to do is to rush straight to a physio. Because if you go to see a physio and they say, oh, yes, how can I help you? And you go, oh, yes, well, I had this pain in my hamstring on my run. And they go, okay, well, how long has this been? Can you tell me a bit more about it? What is it that triggers it? Oh, I don't know, but my hamstring hurts. You need to fix it. That's not enough information to help a physio, and you're both going to go away from that exchange feeling very frustrated. You need to at least go on a second run and see, okay, I mean, I'm using run here as an example because it's the course of most running injuries, but you need to go out and you run. second run, and see how that goes. Warm yourself up properly. Don't go out cold. You really get your muscles ready to go, especially the muscle where you encountered the pain before. Maybe give it a little bit of a gentle stretch out, some activation work, some mobility. Get the body fired up. Head out for a session at a low intensity and see how it feels. And if it's absolutely fine, then I suggest just sort of continuing with the training plan, really. It could be that you slept funny. It could be that there was something that was just especially tight due to an activity that you were doing that was slightly unusual. There are all sorts of reasons that we can get all these little sort of odd aches and pains that will sort of look after themselves, really. However, if you do find that for a second run in a row that you are encountering that pain, that's definitely unusual, but it is still well within the realms of sort of coincidence. It's sort of that three-strike system. If somebody is working for you and they make a mistake, then you wouldn't sort of report them, fire them on the spot, would you? You go, look, that could have happened to anyone. It could have been the kind of mistake that I'd have made. It could be that something wasn't explained to them in their training. You give somebody the benefit of the doubt, unless you're an arsehole. If somebody then makes a second mistake, especially if it's similar to the first one, that's when you go, okay, I mean, this could just be bad luck. Okay, it could be that person is sort of very nervous, overthinking everything, fumbling and making things worse. Okay, going to give them some reassurance. Okay, we're not going to sort of say, oh, it's absolutely fine, don't worry about it, but we're not going to come down on them like a ton of bricks. It's when somebody makes that third mistake that you go, right, sorry, like, this is no longer just bad luck. And this is within a short time frame, I should say. You say, look, this is no longer bad luck. This is no longer just something that can happen to anyone. Like, you're clearly not up to the job. And it's a similar thing with running injuries. That sort of that second run, if you still have a little bit of pain there, okay, like, let's go home. Let's do some yoga. Let's do some foam rolling. Let's do some stretching. Let's see if we can loosen this bad boy up. Let's see if we can sort it. And it's if you go on that third run and it's still there, that's when you really need to book into a physio. And when you can tell the physio it hurts in the same place, no matter what I do, I've tried this, I've done this, I've done this, they're going to be able to give you a much more sort of insightful look into what the injury is. And there comes a point as well where, like, if you stopped training every time that you got sort of any kind of niggle when you were training, you'd never get anything done. It's just, especially as we start to get older, things just don't work quite as well as they used to. And you can't afford to just run to the physio every time. I mean, it's very expensive as much as anything else. So, yeah, any injury, you absolutely need to pull the plug and go, look, I need to stop the sport that is causing the pain. Maybe even if it's sort of an injury that's affecting all three disciplines, maybe I do just need to stop training and focus on recovery. Now, another reason that somebody may want to break from the plan is that the plan may be too easy there. There may not be enough volume. There may not be enough intensity. They feel that they're really just not being pushed. Now, how you approach this, for me, is going to vary quite wildly depending on the time of year that you're in. If you are 6 months out from your race and you're complaining that the intensity is too low, then you need to stick with the process. Okay? What I can't afford is, most people, they will sort of train for, say, like a half marathon or maybe a marathon ahead of a triathlon. A lot of triathletes coming from running. And if you're training for a marathon, you might be able to get your training done for that event in sort of 3, maybe 4 months and still put in a really good time. And you're used to a training plan lasting that sort of distance and being sort of quite different. If you are training for like a 70.3, certainly a full Ironman, you could be training for up to like 9, 10, 11 months for that. Okay, this just needs to be paced so differently to chances are any other kind of training plan that you've done before. Even the step up between half Ironman and Ironman, there can be a big disparity in sort of the starting time for that. If you have a half coming up, half Ironman, it may be that you can sort of start, if you're a reasonable swimmer, cyclist, and runner, you can start sort of 4, maybe 5 months out from that and still sort of do a reasonable time. Whereas you would have to be really quite accomplished in swimming, cycling, and running to be able to knock out a full Ironman on 4 months training. So yeah, if you are a long way out, stick with the process. Either look ahead to the sort of the final weeks of the training plan and ask yourself, would I be able to handle that training? Or ask your coach for sort of an example of how training might look when you get into that real sort of final couple of months. Because chances are you're going to look at that training and go, wow, there's no way I could do that. And when we're that far out from a race, if the intensity is really low, we're just building up your capacity to handle that really hard training that's coming further down the line. Now, if somebody is feeling the training plan is too hard, you're probably going to want to throttle back. It's very rare that I will say to somebody, look, suck it up, push on, come on, let's go. If they're telling me that they're exhausted, they're tired, and, all the warning lights are flashing. You really do need to be mindful, be careful, not rush into anything, and just push on when your body's telling you to stop. You do need to throttle back, and you do need to go, look, if my body is giving me all the warning signs, I know my body better than the author of this training plan, and I know this is too much for my body. Something else that will disrupt your training plan is going to be going on holiday. You are on vacation if you're over in the States. If you are going to be taking some time out from sort of work, if you're going to be going abroad for a week, or just sort of visiting relatives, whatever it is that you're doing, I don't want you to feel that you absolutely have to stick with the swimming, the cycling, and the running if it's going to cause friction. Now, it could be that you have the kind of, if you're going with, say, your other half, your family, maybe you have that kind of relationship where you get there and, yeah, you spend a few hours together each day, but realistically, you can go your separate ways. And there's absolutely no hard feelings. You can do separate things once you're there. It's no big issue. But if you are going on a family holiday to some islands around Spain, I don't want you to feel that you have to hire a bike, that you have to find a swimming pool and stay near one where they've got a proper 25-metre swimming pool. Bring all your gear over so you can keep continuing following that training plan. We all deserve a break from time to time. And hey, if you are absolutely just loving every second of this training plan and your partner is completely supportive and is like, yes, I want you to keep going, and you really want to keep going, then sure, I'm not going to stop you. But equally, I don't want you to feel that you have to stress over not missing a single session when you're on holiday. In fact, in many cases, having that mental and physical reset is like taking a break from work. Whenever we come back from work, whether it is following Christmas or some time off, we often feel a bit more mentally recharged, and we sit back down at our desk, or we get back on site or back in the class, and whatever it is that we're doing, and you go, wow, like I didn't realise how much I needed that. Same with training. Taking a little break from training may end up being more actually sort of useful in the long run, rather than keeping your nose pinned firmly to the grindstone. Again, it depends how much fatigue it is that you're generating in your training. Hopefully not an enormous amount, and hopefully taking this break, you don't kind of think, oh, thank God I can take a week off. Because that means that, well, you're not really enjoying the training. If you're not enjoying the process, then you're not going to have a great result. Now, if you're going away on holiday, I recommend you take your running shoes. It can be a really nice thing to do, to pop on a pair of running shoes and go run around the local area. See it from a different perspective, keep the legs turning over, but not in a way that's going to sort of really compromise you and your enjoyment of the holiday. Cycling is, of course, very difficult. Swimming, it can be hard to find a pool, but could you get in the sea or in the lakes? Take your wetsuit, have a little bit of a swim. Again, that could be something you could do, but I don't want you to really stress over this huge logistical challenge of getting the bike out there or paying to hire a bike, all of that. It's okay if you sort of break from the training plan and have you set yourself a little bit of a rest, a little bit of a reset. Just be careful not to go mad on the running if that's the only sport that you have access to. If you go from running an average of sort of 25 kilometers a week to going to sort of 50 kilometers when you're on holiday, chances of getting injured are really quite decent there. So yeah, I recommend exercising caution in that regard. Now, this is a little bit of a left field one. But what if you're just not having fun? What if the training plan is just not bringing you any happiness, is not bringing you any joy? The kind of the excitement that you had for the sport is disappearing. And you find yourself just sort of doing a bunch of uninspiring sessions. Now, I'm afraid this is how a lot of training plans look, really. I remember I had a client I worked with a few years ago who was, really kind of getting fed up with all the easy runs that we're doing. And he's saying, "Oh, but I'm just a hard and fast person. That's my style." I didn't say it, but I wanted to say, well, I think Ironman's the wrong sport for you, really. Ironman training is a grind that lasts for several months, and this can result in a small disassociation in enjoyment. You can start out really hyped up, and then after a few months of this, you can kind of think, Jesus, like another hour easy run? I guess we can do that. But it's up to you, really, as an athlete, to inject your own fun into your training. Go, right, okay, let's try and find a different route to run. Let me try and find a friend who can come with me. Put the feelers out on sort of a local Facebook group or something. Try and find additional people. Maybe drive out to a new area and go explore somewhere. I think one of the great feelings when you first start running and cycling is of exploring your local area, finding all these roads you didn't know existed and paths, bridle ways. Really feels like an adventure. And then a few years down the line, you know everything like the back of your hand. And you lose that that sense of wanderlust that comes with the training. And that, yeah, by getting in your car, even only driving for 10-15 minutes, it can really sort of reinvent your perception of your training. And you don't need to do it every session, but sort of once a week, maybe twice a week. Taking the time to go out and to sort of make an effort to mix things up, to keep things fun, to keep things interesting is important, I think, because it's about maintaining that motivation and enjoying the process. However, if you are the kind of person who has a very short attention span and you're just not enjoying the training that you're doing, you could increase more interval sessions. I would generally recommend against this, and if you were to include intervals, to keep them very short, to make them sort of strides almost, last around about 30 seconds. If you want to be chasing KOMs on Strava on every opportunity, if you want to be racing other people, if you want to be constantly nose to the grindstone, always looking for that dopamine hit, then racing short course is probably going to be the best thing for you to do. Ironman training, it's not sort of the pinnacle of achievement. I mean, there are sort of, I think, 50,000-60,000 people cross an Ironman finish line each year. It's not very many people at all, is it? But I mean, I can run a sub 19-minute 5k off the bike during a sprint triathlon. How many people do that each year? Much less, I'd wager. Simply going longer isn't always sort of the hardest thing to do or the most impressive thing to do. And there's no shame in going, look, if I really enjoy and I'm really good at doing these shorter, harder, faster efforts, then I need to embrace that. Whereas for a lot of people, Ironman training, it works for them because they can switch their brain off. I can go out for a ride for 4 or 5 hours, feel like they leave everything behind a little bit. And they get back and go, that was amazing, I really loved that. Whereas you'd have somebody else who's just sat there being overtaken by other people on their ride and getting really aggro, wanting to race them, wanting to overtake them. And it doesn't become like a fun experience for them. So if you are really struggling to enjoy your training, if it's just not fun for you, you obviously do what you can to mix things up, but you do also need to ask yourself, like, is this really what I want to be doing with my spare time? Are there other sports, other disciplines, other distances I could be doing that could be filling my bucket more? Now, I think the best reason that you could possibly ever want for sort of changing your training plan is if you need to step up to look after a loved one. I have heard stories of triathletes who have left, people in hospital horribly unwell, maybe even on their deathbed, because they need to get this really important swim in. It's bang out of order. If you're a parent, if you are somebody's partner, if it's a family member, and you need to drive them to hospital, you need to visit them, you need to provide them support, please do that, okay? If you reflect back on your life in years to come, you're not going to remember this workout here or there and how much it helped you. You will just look back and you'll just go like, why wasn't I there for that person that explicitly needed me? A lot of people, they get really drawn into triathlon when it finds them or when they find it. And to them, there is absolutely nothing that's more important in life than triathlon. But this really isn't the case, guys. It's swimming, it's cycling, and it's running. Okay. Now, just because it is one of the most important things in my life, doesn't mean it's more important than other things that I hold dear. You can't afford to let your sort of your passion and your drive and sort of your obsession with this race, with the sport, to affect your ability to just be a good human being. So if you are on the fence about whether you should do something for someone or not, you really do need to ask yourself, is having this long ride really a good enough reason for me to ditch this? And, just because somebody does need you to drop something around, to need you to go to the shops, to pick up a prescription, to drop something around to somebody who's unwell, that does not prevent you from doing any training during that day. And something that I, really want you to take away from this is that something is always better than nothing. If you had a 3-hour ride booked in your training plan, and you have to take some time out to go and run some errands for someone, okay, you might still be able to get a 2-hour ride in, a 90-minute ride in. This is really important, to always be looking for something. And one of the sort of the great frustrations that I have as a coach is if I set an athlete, say like a swim workout, and I log into Training Peaks and I see it's red, they haven't done it, and they've left the comment saying the pool's closed this week. Well, okay, like, I get if you actually turned up to the swimming pool and you went to get in and you found that the doors were locked. Okay, it's not a huge amount you can do there. But you could still head home and you could still put on your running shoes and you could still head out and do 30-40 minutes of running, time that you would have spent in the water anyway, and then getting changed, driving back from the pool, all of this. We all know how time intensive swimming can be. It's to go, look, okay, plan A didn't work, I need to look for plan B. And plan B, more often than not, is going to end up being a run, maybe a strength session, maybe a yoga, Pilates, something like that, because of the time convenience of it. Whether it is getting yourself to the pool, getting changed, going through the showers, getting in the water, or whether you are not rebuilding, but getting your bike ready for a ride, okay? These do really take time. Whereas running, normally it's putting on a few clothes, tying up your shoes, and just getting out the door. So if you are under the cosh for time, then more often than not, running is the easiest option. If you do have a turbo trainer set up indoors all the time, that is a great way to go about that. So you just throw your leg over the bike and get started with a session. But yeah, something's always better than nothing. And it may not be the interval session, it may not be the really big long ride you were hoping for. But I really encourage you, assuming that you have the time and the willpower and maybe the emotional sort of capacity for that. If it's someone that you care for that's very unwell, then you may not be in the mood to exercise at all. But if you can, Don't just throw sort of the hat in and just don't just go, oh, you know what, that's it. I can't do my session today, just because it can't be perfect. Okay, training is all about compromise, and sometimes you just need to get out there and do something. Now, the biggest reason, really, that somebody would need to change their training plan, move away from it, is overtraining, or at least what we call non-functional overreaching, which is where you are really run down, really tired, and you're just not really getting any fitter as a result. You're just digging yourself a deeper hole in the ground rather than recovering. And that is when you do need to back off and you do need to go, right, I need to come up for air here. I need to have a break. I need to allow my body to catch up, because there's a chance that training plan could just be a bit too much for you. It's impossible to know if a training plan really works 100% for someone whenever they start it, whenever they buy it, because that training plan, chances are it wasn't written for you. Again, if it's a coach plan, it may be that, the two of you, between you, have just sort of overestimated your ability to recover a little bit. That's fine, it's not really anybody's fault. But you do need to listen to your body when it's pushing back, when it's saying, no, I can't keep doing this, I'm really tired, I'm really run down. And the more that you try to push through it, the more it pushes back, okay? That's a big no-no. Now, there are 4 signs of non-functional overreaching, which are called the 4 H's. The first is happy. If you are starting to feel depressed, if you are starting to feel low, if you are not enjoying the training anymore, that's a little bit of a warning sign. Now, we can't afford to wake up and be all smiles and rainbows every day. That's an unrealistic expectation. But if, since the intensity of the plan has increased, you're doing all these hours, your mental health is actually suffering, when it should be seeing, a small improvement from doing training, that's a big problem. And you do need to go, okay, right, is this training too much? Am I just throwing myself into all this training blindly when it's actually hurting me and my mental health? And the second H is healthy. Now, it's okay to get a few small, colds, bugs, that's absolutely fine. If you are getting repeated illnesses that you're never really recovering from, if you've constantly got a bit of a cough or a bit of a sniffle and you just can't shake it and you get something else the next week, that's a sign that your immune system is really compromised. And that could well be down to the amount of volume of training that you're doing. So if you're not healthy, if you're always ill with something else, very vulnerable, that again is a red flag that you could be overtraining. The third H is hungry. If you're finding yourself with a suppressed appetite, if you don't really want to eat, that again, it should be a real problem. Now, by the time that you get to this point where your appetite is suppressed, chances are there should have been some warning signs in the back of your mind going, you know what, something doesn't feel right here. This doesn't feel okay, But if this is the final piece in the puzzle, if you're just not finding yourself with an appetite, then that should be an enormous warning sign that things aren't going to plan. Now, it could be unrelated. It could be that you're unwell, that you're under a lot of stress. I think all of us, if we go through a breakup or something, we may find ourselves with no appetite for, some time after that. It's completely normal. But if the only thing you can think of that may be triggering this is an increase in the volume of your training, okay, that is a big problem. Now, the fourth H is something that may make some of you clutch your pearls out there. It's horny, okay? So you should have a healthy, normal sex drive, like for you, is what I'm saying. Now, it may be that when you start training, many people find themselves with an increased libido. Their body kind of, oh yes, I remember, this is what I was designed for, moving, exercising, getting stronger, feeling better about myself, feeling more confident. This can increase our sex drive. But if you get to the point where you know that you're normally the kind of person who kind of thinks, oh, you know what, 2 or 3 times a week, is kind of my normal regularity, and it's been 3 weeks and you just haven't felt up to it at all, that's when you do need to think, yeah, this isn't normal. Something has changed here, and there's a good chance, especially if some of these other symptoms you recognise, that some of that can be from your training. So it's quite a powerful urge that we have. our body's urge to reproduce, and especially as some people get older, when women go through the menopause, it can be very disrupted anyway. However, I do just really want you to to keep this into consideration. If you see a real change here, that could be a sign that you are moving towards that stage of non-functional overreaching. Now, something else to keep an eye out for is a real loss of motivation. Now, motivation is going to wax and it's going to wane throughout the year and throughout your training schedule. When you start out, you're going to be super motivated and you're going to want to be doing all the sessions, keep pushing. And this is the time you actually need to throttle back and go, look, think of the big picture here. But if you find yourself really throwing yourself at your training and you sort of reflect back and you think, well, I'm ticking these sessions off, but I can't remember the last time I was excited to get up and ride my bike. That you do need to take a stop there, and you do need to think to yourself, is this healthy? Am I still enjoying this? Am I still looking for, to achieve, my goals? Because I remember I was having a chat with someone who attended a swim session. He was a pretty serious Ironman athlete. I think he was training for a half. And he sort of chatting to me at the end of the session. And he's saying, oh yeah, I went to, I did this race that he'd been training for all these months. Got there and he said, I just didn't want to be there. He said, I had a really ropey race. There was no enthusiasm. And we had a little bit of a chat. And, it's quite a difficult conversation to have with an athlete, especially one that you're not working with on a one-to-one basis, but you're just helping them with their swimming once a week. I said to him, do you think you might be doing too much training? And he goes, oh, yeah, no, I thought I'd try and catch up on this and do this instead. Yeah, but you know what? I think you're right, he said. I think I just forgot why I started. I forgot why I was doing it. And that's a really common thing for triathletes to suffer from. I mean, if you are training for Ironman and you're doing about 20 hours a week, it can be easy to forget the why and for it to form almost like a kind of addiction. Almost that it's just who you are, it's just what you do. And at the end of the day, if you really have lost that why, you're never going to achieve the goals that you wanted. If you really want to go sub 10 over an Ironman, but you can't remember why you're training, you're not going to get the best out of yourself. And the more that you kind of try to bury your head in the sand and go, no, I just need to do these sessions, I just need to do this training, I just need to push, probably the less likely you are to achieve your goal. And then when you do finish the race in 12 hours something because you were completely shot and you didn't want to be there and you didn't find any happiness throughout in the process, it's not going to keep you in the sport, is it? Whereas you look at somebody who could be training for like a sub 3 marathon, a sub 25k, something like that. Something that doesn't include such a long wind up, quite the same amount of hours of training to get there. And they can often, not always, they can often have a bit more of a bounce in their step, because it's a shorter journey to get themselves to this point. And going back to what I was saying earlier, if somebody is doing all of their long rides on the turbo trainer, going around the same flat route in Zwift, if they're doing the same running routes over and over again, I know a lot of people like routine. I'm not one of them. I mean, sticking this podcast out is about as close as I get to routine each week. But it really should, you should still be finding some enjoyment, some happiness in the process. Still be excited for that race. And if you get to that point where you're going, I just don't know why I'm doing this. I can't remember why I started. Especially if you're paying a coach for your time to help you facilitate this. You do need to take a step back and say, look, I think it might be best if I take a rest day or two. And I remember chatting to an athlete and we were talking about how he was feeling the fatigue was really starting to build up. He was really tired. And he was one of these guys, he wanted to do everything by the numbers. And I said to him, if you're really feeling run down, why don't we take an extra rest day? I might as well suggested he jumped off of the Empire State Building. And to him, the idea of taking an extra rest day was just completely unthinkable. And if you have this mindset, then there's a chance that that extra rest day may actually really be what it is that you need to help yourself find balance in your training again. Now, bad weather can also affect your training. If you are looking at the forecast and it's a really nice day on Saturday, but it's an absolute howler of a storm that's coming in on the Sunday, you might want to change your training around. You might want to go, okay, you know what? I'm going to do my long ride that I normally do on the Sunday. I'm going to do it on the Saturday while the weather's nice. There's a big weather front coming in tomorrow. It could be that I do a swim session instead. It could be that I just suck it up and go out for a run. But I know that I'm sure as hell not want to go out for a bike ride in that horrible weather. And I just need to shift my training around to fix that. And additionally, a lot of training plans that you'll buy off the shelf, they normally have rest days on Monday. And this is the most popular day for a rest day. People do their long sessions on the Friday, the Friday, Saturday and the Sunday often, when they'll have their most intense days of training. But if for you, Saturday or Sunday is like a sacred family day, it could be that you're very religious and that for you, the Saturday or Sunday is a holy day, and for you, there's absolutely no chance of any training on that day. That's fine, and you can go and you can move those around. Now, when I'm coaching people, I don't generally have an issue with them moving sessions around, just as long as we try to avoid running on tired legs. So we don't necessarily want to be doing strength work the day before a long run, or a really long ride the day before a really long run, where we can help it. But sometimes, as in this example, if it's really lovely weather on Saturday, horrible weather on Sunday, if you do it every now and then, it's not actually going to have that much of an impact. So I think that's a good list of reasons why you might want to break from your training plan. But we need to sort of think to ourselves, well, okay, so if we do break from the training plan, then how do we get back on that training plan? Because you don't want to get to the point where you think, oh, that's it. I've missed like 2 days from my training plan. It's all over. I need to, start again. That's not the case. However, if you do have a sort of slightly bigger break, it may take a little bit more in the way of creativity for you to get back to where you are on the training plan. And this is why. I mean, sort of the cheapest option that I offer with my coaching is £60 a month, where it's just a training plan that I write someone. The reason that I don't tend to push people towards this one is because if I write somebody a 6-month block of training to get them ready for an Ironman 70.3, and after 6 weeks they have to take sort of 10 days away from training because they've had to go away on a business trip, they come back and they look at that training plan that they paid me for and they go, I don't know, like how am I going to start again? I feel that I've completely lost track of everything, or like, is this good? Do I just continue on or not? And it is difficult for somebody to get back on. So here are a few guidelines that I'm going to give you to help you sort of get yourself back on the wagon with that training plan, if possible. Now, it is hard to get back on that wagon once you've fallen off, but I'm going to do everything that I can to try and help you set yourself up for success. Now, the cardinal sin here can be to stack workouts in a effort to try and catch up. So let's say that you missed Tuesday and Wednesday sessions and you get to Thursday and you go, oh, I can't believe I missed those 2 sessions. Well, if I squeeze in today's workout on Thursday and Monday's workout, and then the next day I can stack, and it just starts to become a mess. Look, those 2 workouts that we missed, forget about them. If there was maybe one workout that you missed and you want to squeeze it in the next day, it might not be a big problem. Once you start looking at 2 days or more, you do just run the risk of playing a game of perpetual catch-up and running yourself into the ground and exhaustion, okay? It's the last thing we want to do. So we really do need to think, right, those days that we lost, we just need to move on from it and see what we can do to help ourselves sort of get back on this wagon. Now, if you have lost a big block of training, the first thing we're going to look at is the long rides. So if you have been building yourself up, now I generally, when I'm writing plans, will extend the duration of each run by 5 minutes and each ride by 10 minutes. Now, if you miss 1 week of these progressions, it's probably not the end of the world and you can probably afford to keep cracking on. If you're looking to make sort of a bigger jump than that, if you've lost more time, I wouldn't increase your long run by more than 10 minutes. I think that is asking for trouble a little bit. You might be absolutely fine. You might find yourself in a fair bit of trouble because you're just asking your body to do something that it's not capable of doing. It can't. Can't handle that load just out of the blue like that. And it also, it will sort of make you feel a bit run down as well, even if you don't get an injury, because it is quite a step up in duration of that longer run. So something to keep into consideration there is that, you can generally pick up, if it's only been 1 week or maybe two, pick up the long runs in the plan. Just go, okay, I'm just going to follow the plan out. Nothing happened with the longer sessions, but do just be mindful of this, and don't do anything that makes you feel kind of uncomfortable that you might be asking for an injury. The problem really comes with the interval sessions, which is a case of, right, well, I know that I've missed a couple of weeks of intervals. Can I pick up where I left off? Hopefully, the answer is yes. Hopefully you don't look at these interval workouts and bulk at them. If you do, then you've got two options really. You can go back to the interval sessions that you missed and just swap them. So, okay, I've got this bike interval session on Tuesday. I missed some bike intervals last week that look a bit easier, so I'll do those. You can do that, but you then run the risk of always being 1 week behind the intervals on the plan. That's not necessarily where you want to be. Again, there's nothing massively wrong with it, but it is just going to make you feel a little bit kind of, I do feel that I really lost a lot of time there by losing that week. What I would consider doing instead is, if you look at the plan, you've missed a week or two of training, you look at the intervals that you got. Okay, so I've got 4 15-minute sweet spot intervals coming up this week. I'm going to go into this session with the goal of doing 3, not expecting to get to 4. But if I do, that's brilliant. Okay, and I'm really going to take that. So just maybe doing less intervals, maybe riding at a lower intensity, could be a value. And that sort of change in intensity is something I wouldn't necessarily be afraid of either, even if you're running any kind of interval session. Now, if somebody wakes up and they're feeling a little bit out of sorts and they have a really tough, like, Hail Mary interval session, it's probably not there to do it. But if it is sort of some relatively, sort of mundane intervals, I guess, if it's sort of tempo work, or some shorter threshold stuff with some decent rests, if it isn't the kind of thing that's going to blow your socks off, just turning down the intensity to, like, lowering your FTP or something by 5% for that workout. A lot of software that you can follow workouts through has an intensity slider. You can drop that interval intensity down. I'd much rather somebody does that and gets through a session than tries to do it 100% and blows up. Now, depending on how intense the plan is relative to your ability, your current fitness, all sorts of factors, it may be possible for you to slowly claw your way back up. And it does depend actually a lot on your proximity to a rest week as well. So if the only week that you missed was a rest week, then you might be able to hop straight back on. Equally, if you missed the week before a rest week, then if you just stick with the programming on the rest week and you just accept that you lost that week of hard training, then you might be able to get yourself sort of caught back up there. So you may be able to catch up relatively quickly, or you may come to a realization after a week or two of trying to get back on the horse of the training plan that actually, what, like, it's gone, it's disappearing into the distance. What you have to do is you'll either have to keep adjusting it manually yourself, or just send your workouts back. So if, for instance, you're 10 weeks out from a race and you miss weeks 1 and 2, then you're just not going to get round to doing weeks sort of 7 and 8. Now, when you do actually approach a race, it does get a bit trickier, because you have taper weeks. So depending on the length of the taper, it may be weeks 7 and 8 that you don't do, because you still need week 9 as your taper and week 10 as the race, if that makes sense. What you can't afford to do is say, oh, well, I've missed 2 weeks of training, so I walk the whole plan back 2 weeks and then completely miss your taper. No matter how behind you feel with your training, you are not behind as you think you are. And I would always much rather somebody goes into a race fresh, but able to pull something out of the bag on the day, than somebody turn up on the start line really fatigued, really overtrained, really tired, malnourished, because they really wanted to push and get all of their training done. So there we have it. Honestly, it is a bit of trial and error. Trying to work out how to get back onto this training wagon if you've fallen off of it. If you do find yourself in this situation, or you may be in this situation at the moment, I do wish you the very best in resolving it. It's not super easy, but most people who follow a training plan, they will fall off it at some point. So don't beat yourself up too bad. It doesn't give you any lack of dedication. It doesn't mean you're a bad athlete. It's just life getting in the way. Thanks again for your company, everyone. I hope you found that useful and interesting. If you're interested in coaching, then drop me an email to the address down in the show notes down there. Otherwise, wishing you the very best with the week ahead, and I'll see you all next Tuesday morning.